Welcome to Gamecock Pod Live.
For the next 3 to 4 years, I'll be committed to the University of...
This is Rogers again to the 25, 20, 15, 10. Rogers scores! Jackie Bradley Jr. delivered for the Gamecocks. Lost it up, looking for Kelly. Touchdown! Can you believe it?
And South Carolina is sending shockwaves through the SEC.
Frederick plays it in at the buzzer. That's a win! Unbelievable! I don't believe it!
And now, live from Studio 54 of the Gamecock Pod Studios, here's the Cockfather himself, Keith Alsep.
All right, everybody, good morning and welcome to Gamecock Pod Live for July the 17th, 7/17/24. If you add 7 and 17, you get 24. How about that? Today is episode number 1524 of Gamecock Pod Daily and Gamecock Pod Live. And so I apologize since you're unable to watch. If you watch on my Twitter account, evidently Elon Musk has now said if you have a premium Twitter account, you must create the live broadcast from Twitter. But for everybody on YouTube or on at Gamecock Pod watching on Twitter, I say good morning to you. And we are just 38 days away from the return of our beloved college football. Of course, number 38, the greatest player, the only Heisman Trophy winner to ever don the garnet and black. It was my joy and some of my greatest memories as a teenager growing up with my family, watching Big George take the toss sweep right, the toss sweep left, the sprint draw right, and the sprint draw left. And everybody in the stadium knew it was coming by which way the flanker went in motion. They ran 2 tight ends and I formation and 1 wide receiver. And about 99.9% of the time when the wide receiver went in motion to the right, it was going to the right. If he lined up on the left, on the right and went in motion to the left, it was going to the left. And they still couldn't stop it. He had a tremendous offensive line led by George Schechterly, Steve Gattell, Mark Austin, and Chuck Slaughter. And those guys, I mean, just absolute beasts. Willie Scott, Ben Cornett, tremendous football player, Steve Dorsey, the fullback in 1979. And then when Johnny Wright came back in 1980, he played fullback. You also had Carl West, who was pretty doggone good and had I think about a 40-yard touchdown run on a belly play in the Georgia game that was on national TV where the Gamecocks were going to win that game. And what had happened was George Rogers had broken his wrist at Michigan and wore a cast on it all season long. And Georgia's players stomped on him in the pile and ripped the cast off. And they shot his hand up with Novocaine and wrapped him back up to put him back in. He couldn't feel the football and he fumbled. But make no mistake about it, South Carolina was going to win that game, and that team was never the same. All right, let's jump into our Nana's Porch news, notes, and highlights. brought to you by the award-winning full-service catering company servicing the greater Charlotte, Rock Hill, Fort Mill, Lancaster area. Nana's Porch, your go-to for all your catering needs, whether it's a banquet, a wedding, a corporate event, or the big backyard bash with a whole hog barbecue. Nana's Porch has got you covered. If you have an event that requires a food trailer, Nana's Porch voted among the top 3 food trailers in Charlotte by the local newspaper poll, so you know it's good. And the award-winning pimento cheese voted both number 1 and number 2 in the meat and cheese category by the North Carolina Specialty Foods Association. Good. The smoky jalapeno and the great regular flavor. And let me tell you what's different. Most pimento cheese people, they just cut the jalapenos up and they put them in there. And a lot of times it's just too hot, it's too spicy. Okay, but at Nana's Porch, they smoke them first, and it kind of takes some of the heat out, and it enhances the flavor. And that's what makes it absolutely the best pimento cheese on the planet. All right, so we were scheduled to have the dynamic duo of John Whittle and Alex Jones from the Big Spur with us. John Whittle, let's pray for a speedy recovery for him. He woke up in the middle of the night sick as a dog. He will not be able to join us, but Alex will jump in, and I will have some thoughts on this Gamecock football team after we talk to Alex. But to the headlines. Gamecock women's basketball. Their game against Iowa State in the Fort Myers tip-off, that game time has been announced. It will be on Thanksgiving Day at noon on Fox, F-O-X. A little line from You've Got Mail. All right, so that game will be broadcast on national television. Okay. All other games of the tournament will air live on the Women's Sports Network, a free ad-supported streaming television network and the first and only 24-hour-a-day, 7-day-a-week platform dedicated exclusively to female athletes. Women's Sports Network is available in over 100 million homes or households in the country. If you've got a Roku, if you've got Amazon, Freevee, Tubi, if you've got an LG TV, you can watch it on your LV, Smart TV, Fubo, Plex, which I don't really know what that is, and Zumu Play. But I know I'll be watching either on my LG or on Roku, because I got a Roku stick. All right, since last Wednesday's shows, the Gamecocks have landed a couple of really big-time commitments, in my opinion. We'll dive into that with Alex in just a few minutes. The Gamecocks stunned James Franklin in Penn State by landing the number 1 wide receiver in the state of Pennsylvania, Lex Cyrus, 5'10", 170, a guy with long arms, so he's got a bigger catch radius, and he is a 10'4", 100-meter guy. Okay, on Monday during the pod, Havelock, North Carolina, I think he'll be a 4-star. I think he's a defensive end. He's 6'4", 225. Donovan Darden committed to South Carolina over NC State, Illinois, Utah, and a bunch of other really good schools. And go watch the film, okay? The film does not lie. And yes, I know they're called highlights for a reason. But this guy's size, his length, his suddenness, his quickness, his explosiveness, it just jumps off the page. And we'll get Alex's thoughts on these guys coming up. That now gives the Gamecocks 18 public commitments with 2 unannounced welcome homes and several decisions coming up later this month. All right, PJ Morlando, okay, for all the Gamecock fans that were out there thinking you were going to sneak him into school, okay, it's not happening. He was picked number 16 overall by the Marlins, which they're really kind of a fringe Major League Baseball organization. The slot money for that spot is over $4.7 million. He'll probably go for a little bit below slot, but they'll probably make it up with a bigger signing bonus. Cole Messina went in the 3rd round to the Colorado Rockies. He's gone. Okay, Eli Jones, as John Whittle predicted, would probably go in the 7th round, which he did. That means he is probably gone. Your top JUCO pitcher, Brandon Clark, he went in the 5th round to the Boston Red Sox. He's gone. Garrett Gainey could be gone. He went in the 9th round to Tampa Bay. And Carson Messina, who was expected to go much higher, he went in round 12. And the Blue Jays don't have a lot of money, but I just think that kid is probably hell-bent on playing professional baseball. So, all right. So if you like the show, if you want to be notified of all upcoming live pods, hit the subscribe button on the YouTube page. Give us a 5-star review. The same for everybody that is listening on Apple Podcasts. It's been a while since we've gotten a review on Apple Podcast. Hit the like, rate us 5 stars. It helps the show. It drives more traffic. Same thing on Spotify. Okay, I know back in the day we certainly had some audio difficulties, but I think other than when the Wi-Fi goes amok, which can happen to anybody, I think we're doing pretty good. Also, and if you enjoy watching the live Wednesday show on YouTube and would like more of this podcast, you can become an annual VIP or a monthly VIP subscriber to Gamecock Pod Daily and join our growing Gamecock Pod family. We had a tremendous town hall last night. It went about an hour and 5 minutes, and then we had about a 45-minute overtime segment. You'll be able to listen to the show every single day, Monday through Friday, and listen to great guests like Alex Jones, who just popped in the waiting room. We'll be bringing him on in just a second. Hale McGranahan, who we had on last week, John Whittle, who would have been on today had he not taken sick, so we wish for his speedy recovery. All from the Big Spur, Mike Yuba from Gamecock Central, Jordan Kay, who will be with us next week. He's at SEC Media Days this week. Peyton Titus, both from Go Gamecocks and the state, Michael W. Bratton, the host of that SEC podcast, and 24/7 Sports National College Football analyst Brad Crawford, my good friend, former sports director and longtime Columbia sportscaster Mike Gillespie, and many, many more. As a VIP subscriber, you can join or listen to the Garnet and Black Town Hall, which takes place every Tuesday night. It's a live interactive Zoom call. It's like being down at your favorite sports bar, hanging out, talking Gamecocks with up to 100 of your favorite Gamecocks and friends. That lasts an hour. And then, like I said, we go to an unrecorded overtime session. And that's where the real scoop gets dropped and discussed. In addition to the Garnet and Black Town Hall, VIP subscribers get the most popular podcast during football season, the morning after. I put it up on Sunday morning. I give my thoughts. A lot of times, if it's a day game, I'll record on Saturday evening, and you get my raw thoughts on that Saturday's game. Even during bye weeks, there's always a morning after podcast on Sundays during football season, and we've got more VIP perks in the works. So how do you find us? Follow me on Twitter at Gamecock Pod. Follow the show, or follow me on Twitter at KAllsep. Follow the show on Twitter at Gamecock Pod. Or you can go to Patreon. That's patreon.com/Gamecock Pod Daily, all lowercase, no spaces. If all else fails, just hit the old tweeter or the Googler, and you can find us. All right, let's go out onto the Nana's Porch guest line and bring in my guy, Alex Jones from the Big Spur, not to be confused with the now bankrupt InfoWars Alex Jones, who is a lot uglier and a lot louder and harder to listen to than Alex, although there's probably some people watching or listening that actually like that guy, and you know what? That's okay. Alex, good morning. How you doing, my friend?
On.
We got you. How you doing?
I'm doing great. I appreciate you having me back on.
Always great to have you on. Appreciate you jumping on a little earlier than anticipated, because John took sick last night. Sounds like some kind of stomach bug. Hopefully it's not COVID again. That's never a good thing. So, Alex, number one, have you been watching SEC Media Days on the SEC Network?
So I pretty much watched the first day of it, obviously with Shane being on, but I haven't seen what else going on that. But I saw a couple of the coaches that first day.
All right, so riddle me this, okay? How good is Nick Saban? I mean, that guy is it easy to see why he is the best recruiter in all of college football when you listen and watch him on TV? That guy is silky smooth, isn't he?
Yeah, I thought he would be great on TV whenever it was announced he was going to do some of that. But I thought these first couple of days he's been awesome. And yeah, as you mentioned, like you can see why he's a great recruiter. Like he's just really, really good at getting his message across.
Man, he's really good, no doubt about it. All right, so Shane Beamer was up on day one. He followed General Brian Beauregard Kelly, who, when he was introduced as LSU's head football coach and made his appearance, I think, at a basketball game, he tried to use y'all 3 or 4 times and talk with a Southern accent. But you can't deny that guy's a great football coach. They're on South Carolina's schedule. and he said this was going to be his best and deepest team. What were your general impressions and takeaways from Kelly, after the commissioner gave his State of the Union address on the SEC?
Yeah, the biggest question with LSU this year is, was Garrett Nussmeier going to be at quarterback after Daniels winning the Heisman and going to the NFL? It sounds like Nussmeier had a pretty good bowl game against Wisconsin, I think, in Tampa. I think there's some confidence there on LSU's side about, what he can do. Last year the defense for LSU wasn't great, and it sounds like they have some confidence as to what they did in the offseason to improve their defense. And, if they can improve their defense, they may be a pretty stout team this year, and it'd be interesting to watch that game in week 3 when they come to Columbia.
No doubt about it. So to me, I agree, Garrett Nussmeier, he ain't Jaden Daniels. Okay. We know that, but they were god awful on defense. They couldn't stop anybody. Hell, I think South Carolina could have run the ball for 250 yards against LSU's defense last year. Too bad we couldn't play them last year, right?
Right, yeah.
All right, so what really stands out for you, Alex, from Shane Beamer's appearance? Obviously, I think he had about a 17-minute introductory state of the Gamecocks. But your thoughts on Shane Beamer's performance at SEC Media Days on Monday?
Yeah, in the time, he made it very clear that 5-7 for South Carolina is not the standard they want to set. And I think one of the bigger things that stood out to me from what he said was, and really from the players too, was how much confidence they have in the defense this year. When you kind of look at the defense, like they got a lot of players returning on all 3 levels who are talented and have South Carolina experience. So, I thought, he mentioned, Lenore Sellers, what they can do around him, and a lot of new faces on offense. But, I think there's confidence on both sides of the ball that they can get things done this year.
All right, so what are your thoughts on the rule changes? Like now, one player designated on defense, probably be Debo Williams when he's out there. Your starting quarterback, presumptively Lenore Sellers. They get the earpiece to where they can listen to whoever's the play caller or the designated coach on the microphone. Your thoughts on that? And now the clock will not stop on first downs until the final 2 minutes. I think that's a carryover, but I think this year they're adding a 2-minute warning. And analysts are coaches. They can coach just like a regular coach. All the restrictions have been taken off during practice and games. Just your thoughts on how that dynamic could impact South Carolina.
Yeah, I think kind of going back to the helmet communication part, like the NFL's done that forever, and it seems like it's something that was coming to college football at some point. And I think it's needed. Like you don't have to do you're not going to see the whole big signs anymore with a whole bunch of weird emojis on them like you see. I think that's going to be good for college football. As far as the timing thing and the first downs, I think, one of the topics of conversations really in all college sports is the timing of games. And that's going to help a little bit because, when you think about some of these games and the commercial time that you get, sometimes these games get drug out to a long, long game. So I think that's great for college football. And as far as the analysts, I think as far as South Carolina is going to help because they have some really good analysts when you think about it. You think a guy like Greg Atkins on the offensive line, former offensive line coach who's getting that off-field role now, but now he can really help Lonnie Teasley and those guys. I think of a guy like Shula, who has been mentioned as really helping the quarterbacks this year with Dowell Loggins. So I think it's going to be a huge, huge plus for South Carolina to have that.
I agree. So here's my thought. So the communication will be open until the play clock goes under 15 seconds. Okay, so the play clock starts at 40. So out here in Texas, they call the up-tempo, hurry-up offense, they call it NASCAR because it goes really fast. So my thought is if you have a young quarterback like Lenora Sellers, I'm going up-tempo because I can get him up to the line of scrimmage immediately. I can look at the defense. I can be in constant communication with him from the time they spot the ball, where there's probably still going to be 37 or 38 seconds on the play clock. And if you snap it before it gets to 15, the offensive coordinator can be telling you how they're changing the protection, they're rolling, we're changing the play. I mean, hell, you could probably change the play twice if you needed to if the defense keeps shifting. I think with an inexperienced quarterback like Lenora Sellers, if I'm South Carolina, I mean, unless I can just line up and dominate teams running the football like South Carolina did with George Rogers. And by the way, let's face it, Rocket Sanders will be the closest thing to George Rogers South Carolina's had since George Rogers. No offense to everybody that thinks Marcus Lattimore's the best running back to ever play at South Carolina. I'm going to break your heart here and tell you on his best day, he was a 4'7" guy. George Rogers was 6'2", 230-plus pounds, and could run a 4.5 without warming up. Okay, go watch the film. But I mean, your thoughts on potentially how that could impact South Carolina by them getting up to the line of scrimmage, looking at the defense, and Mike Shula or Dowell Loggins being able to help Lenora Sellers negotiate what's going on defense.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, especially with Lenora's being, first-time starter pretty much. Dowell Loggins can be up in the press box and can see exactly what the defense is lining up in and either say, yeah, go with this play, or no, let's change it to this. And then, I think another thing that will help him, like sometimes, as a quarterback, it can be difficult to maybe see what the secondary is doing and what they're trying to hide or disguise. If you're up in the press box, as Dowell Loggins will be or has been, he can see, hey, they're in cover 2, but watch out for, a blitz on the backside or something. So I think that will be huge for Lenora's, and one, just for in-game stuff, but two, then help them see, like, hey, this is what they've been trying to do. And, so I think it'll be huge for Lenora's.
And they will be able to use, SEC is partnered with Apple. There'll be iPads on the sidelines. They'll be able to, just like in the NFL, go back and watch the previous series. I don't think you can watch anything from any other games, just from that game. Mm-hmm. That's the rule. But I think that will be a big help as well. And then, potentially having somebody like Mike Shula on the sidelines who could be a calming influence and is a guy that, coached the Carolina Panthers when they had Cam Newton to an MVP season in the Super Bowl. I think it's a great thing. All right. And so, Alex, this was one of my questions for John. So now with analysts, okay, we all know Dowell Loggins really wanted, I think his name's Steven Juracek, or it's Juracek, the son of the athletic director, to be the tight ends coach. That was his analyst. Now with analysts being free to coach, How much should Sean Elliott be coaching South Carolina's offensive line every single day in practice?
I mean, I think when you look at his track record of what he did the first time around at South Carolina and South Carolina's run game and how good the South Carolina run game was, I mean, I think there's a little bit of, I think he probably should be helping a little bit. As the run game coordinator, you have to imagine that he's going to have a role in that game too. Like he's going to have a say in like, hey, I think the offensive line should do this. But with him being the tight ends coach, I think he'll probably play a little bit of role in that, and I think you'll see that this year.
Well, I got nothing against Lonnie Teasley. I'm going to give him mad props as a recruiter because the dude is magical on the trail. We'll get to that in a minute. But in this Gamecock opinion, Sean Elliott should be totally in charge of the offensive line, and he can be the bad guy. Because he will get in your face. He will get you fired up. But South Carolina's offensive lines, they could run the football. Lonnie Teasley's basically been the offensive line coach outside of 2 or 3 games since Shane Beamer's been the head coach at South Carolina because of Greg Atkins' health situation. And last year, South Carolina averaged 2.8 yards per carry. So you got Rocket Sanders. You got a bunch of dudes returning. I trust Sean Elliott to coach those guys up. And I trust that Lonnie Teasley can help him and be the good guy. Kind of like Chad Holbrook was the good guy for Ray Tanner. He could pat them on the back and keep their confidence up after Ray Tanner, chewed a hole in the back of their side of their pants because he was in their butt so hard. So that's what I think, but that's just me. All right, so Alex, I'm going to put you on the spot, and then we're going to talk recruiting. What are your 3 biggest question marks for this Gamecock football team as we're about 15 days away from the start of fall camp?
I'd say probably number one is how improved is the offensive line. Yeah, I think that was a huge question mark last year, and really injuries played a big part in that. But now you got some returning guys in there. You got a couple of newcomers, either via transfer portal or high school recruiting. Just how big a step have they taken, and what's that going to look like? Who's going to be the starting 5 by the time ODU comes around? I think sticking on offense, who's going to step up at wide receiver? You got a bunch of transfers coming in, and they need people to step up. You need, does Nick Carver take a big step from year 1 to year 2? Who are some other guy like Tyshawn Russell? Does he make a big step? And who from those transfer portal guys are guys who can be real threats for them? You got 2 you think of really are Dale Von Campbell and Vendrevis Jacobs. Like those 2 guys, I think probably got a chance to play a big role for South Carolina. Moving over to probably my third question for defense side of the ball. We know what they got in the secondary as in the safety spot. They got the one corner of Donald Fortune, but who's going to be that other corner? You got, when you think about it, you got Judge Collier, Bakari Swain, Emory Floyd. So I think that's going to be one of those top position battles that we have in fall camp, and we'll see who comes out of that and starts an ODU.
All right, good stuff. So on Monday's pod, I did my 5 biggest question marks. And just like you, number 1 was the offensive line. There's got to be massive improvements, right? You only had 62 first downs running the football in 12 games. You barely got to 1,000 yards rushing on the season, 1,021, and averaged just 2.8 yards per carry. You were only 34% on third down, primarily because not only you couldn't run the football, you couldn't protect the quarterback. Spencer Rattler was sacked 41 times, 9 times in the season opener alone. That's why Sean Elliott has got to be the fixer, in my opinion. Is the personnel better? Yes. Are there more bodies? Yes. Is South Carolina healthier on the offensive line? Yes, without a doubt. I do believe there are answers there. But you can't have Rocket Sanders averaging 2.8 yards per carry. Okay. Number one, he ain't going to average 2.8 yards per carry because he will truck guys and run through and run over and then run by guys just like George Rogers did. I think Lenore Sellers is going to be really, really good, but he's never started a football game. So it's kind of a question mark. Especially game 2, you're going on the road, Commonwealth Stadium. Then you're coming back to LSU. You're going to Alabama. There's you're going to Death Valley and Clemson. You're going to Oklahoma. Not the easiest of venues for a true freshman quarterback, but I do believe the helmet communication and just how calm, cool, and collected he appears to be, and the high football IQ, just like you, wide receiver, cornerback. All right, but here's one nobody's talking about. All right, Parker White left South Carolina 3 years ago as the all-time leader in field goals. Inside 47 yards, he was pretty much automatic. Will Muschamp run him out there for a bunch of 55-yard kicks. He didn't make many of them. Hell, I think they attempted a 59-yard field goal in that Georgia game in 2019. I think him and Kirby Smart set college football back about 100 years with the way they managed the final 4 minutes of that game. And then Mitch Jeter stepped in. He was a great kickoff guy. Well, all he did was go 11 for 11 in 2022 and then went 12 for 14 last year, which in my math is 23 for 25. Okay. Alex Herrera has never attempted a field goal in a college football game. And on top of that, he was injured a good portion of the spring. And so, Alex, when I look at it, and you go to Kentucky in game 2, that could be a down-to-the-wire game. Not only how is Lenore Sellers going to be if he's got to lead a 2-minute drive to get you in field goal position, how's Alex Herrera going to respond if he's lined up with 3 seconds left in a tie game and he's got to hit a 45-yard field goal to win the game?
Yeah, I think that's a great question and one that probably needs to be talked about a little bit more because, as you mentioned, Mitch Jeter was really consistent and kind of took over for Parker White and was, as you mentioned, really, really solid last year. Now that he's transferred out, I think all eyes kind of turned to Herrera or, William Joyce maybe as that kicker spot. I think probably Herrera will end up with it. But, yeah, we've seen multiple times these past couple of years where South Carolina needs to make big kicks to either, tie the game or even, go up ahead. You think about what Mitch Jeter did at Clemson 2 years ago, made that big kick that gave the Gamecocks the lead. So, that's a big question and one that's probably obviously on Joe DeCamillis' mind as fall camp comes or preseason camp comes around.
Now, Joe DeCamillis, he's an answer. Okay, Pete Limbo was great. Joe DeCamillis coached special teams in the National Football League for over 35 years. He's one of the all-time great special teams coaches. So, you do have that, most certainly. That I think you've got to hope Joe D has an answer, whether it's Alex Herrera or somebody else, that somebody can step up and consistently make field goals. Just like you said in that Clemson game in 2022 in the fourth quarter, it's a tie game. Mitch Jeter walks out there and he just calmly split the uprights. I mean, it went well over right dead center over the crossbar, right? So that is definitely important when you consider, you know, what Nick Saban said, what Shane Beamer said of just how narrow the margin is for winning and losing. You know, special teams and takeaways, which I thought was a surprising statistic since 2021. South Carolina leads the SEC in takeaways. That, you know, when South Carolina's been opportunistic, they win football games.
Yeah, I think it kind of says something about the first 2 years, too, because last year they, for the most part, kind of struggled to get takeaways, especially kind of early on in that season. You know, they just weren't getting them. They weren't bouncing their way and things like that. So I think it says a lot about what they were able to do those first 2 seasons and something that they really need to emphasize heading into 2024.
And, you know, when they went to the hybrid nickel defense and started playing more 3 linebackers, they started getting more turnovers.
Yep.
But the lack of explosive plays, Nick Saban mentioned that. But that's because you couldn't run the football. You know, in 2022, you could run it. In 21, with Kevin Harris, you could, and Zaquandre White, you could run it. And, you know, if you can run the ball and have quarterback run game, you can add RPO and play action passing and be much more effective with a young quarterback instead of, you know, putting it all on his shoulders.
Yeah, you know, when you think back to last year, the explosive plays really came from Spencer and Xavier Legette. And you really didn't, and Mario Anderson to a certain extent, you really didn't have much of a threat other than that. You know, now, but I think, as you mentioned, with Lenoris and his legs and a better run game, it's only going to make it to where the secondary has to respect the run game and open up play action passes down the field. So, you know, I expect to see a few more explosive plays this year, and we'll see how that goes.
No doubt. All right, so let's jump into recruiting. And first, your thoughts on Darren Usher, a South Carolina graduate who was essentially the same role as Taylor Edwards at Auburn, at Boise State before that. And so I also like to add a disclaimer. I'm not an excuse maker, okay? But when the guy that was at Boise State, whose name escapes me right now,
Brian
Harsin, he was just a weird dude, and he turned a lot of people off. And the Yellowwood guy, he turned the faucet off on the NIL money. They weren't getting any because he wanted Brian Harsin fired. Okay, so that kind of handcuffs you, right? In the age of the transfer portal, name, image, and likeness, etc. Then he goes to Oregon. He works for Dan Lanning, and that is an SEC football operations department from everything, particularly in recruiting. Then Chip Kelly hires him to be the general manager. He's only there for a couple months, and then Chip Kelly bolts, for whatever reason, to become the offensive coordinator at Ohio State. And Dan Lanning thinks so highly of Darren Usher, he brings him back. And so your thoughts on Darren Usher replacing Taylor Edwards, and then I'll have a follow-up question.
Yeah, I think with Usher, I mean, it seems like a pretty solid replacement from Beamer for Taylor Edwards. You know, a guy who, as you mentioned, has all the stops and, you know, has the experience around the country, really. You mean, think about out west. He was at Boise State, had that job for, I think, the final 2 seasons he was at Boise State. Brian Harsin thought well enough of him to bring him to Auburn with him and make him the director of recruiting there. So he's got that SEC experience. And then you think about his 2 stints at Oregon. As you mentioned, Oregon's always a top recruiting class in the country, it seems like. And a guy like Dan Lang's only going to have really good recruiters and people in that recruiting staff. And he thought really well of him that, told him, like, hey, if at UCLA doesn't work out, we always have a spot open for you here. So I think that says a lot. And then just kind of the cherry on top for him is he's South Carolina grad, 2009 graduate. So I think for him, it's an important job for him. It's one that he's going to do everything he can to help make South Carolina better.
I agree. All right, so Alex, are you anticipating any fallout with this class or with potential targets that are announcing within the next 30 days due to the loss of Taylor Edwards?
I wouldn't expect any of that to happen. Taylor Edwards did play a key role in South Carolina's recruiting efforts, really all their players. But, just in my opinion, I wouldn't expect any of that to go on.
All right, so let's talk about South Carolina's last 3 public commitments, the July commitments. Linebacker Jaden Breaker, 6'3", about 212, from South Gwinnett High School. To me, he's the one guy that I do project to be like a will linebacker because he's lean. He plays outside linebacker. He's stacked. He plays in space. He looks really explosive. Your thoughts on Jaden Breaker?
Yeah, a guy who, when you watch him on film, just really good instincts and really quick. I think that's one thing that stands out about him. 6'3", 212 pounds. Like, he's a good-looking linebacker already for his age. I think he's going to be a guy who, may not he'll come in and push some of those guys in the starting role, and he may see some playing time, even if it's on special teams. But a guy who, seems like a pretty solid pickup so far.
All right, and then last Thursday, South Carolina shocked the recruiting world in, Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, the home of Tyshawn Russell. Different high school, but South Carolina gets the number 1 wide receiver from the Keystone State in Lex Cyrus, 5'10", 170. And Alex, a guy that's a 10-400 meters guy. And according to the scouting report, he's got long arms. So he's basically like about a 6'1" or 6'2" wide receiver, which gives you a bigger catch radius. But just, I know James Franklin can't run a 10-400 meters, but he probably sprinted down to the liquor store to drown his sorrows after South Carolina takes the number 1 wide receiver out of his state. Your thoughts on the Lex Cyrus pickup?
Yeah, I think that's a huge pickup for South Carolina. When you think about that recruitment, the big question around it was, can South Carolina pull him out of Pennsylvania, just being, I think it was like 30 minutes away from State College. And, just for Mike Furry to go in there and be able to do that, that's huge for him and on the recruiting trail. And it seems like, he's going to be a solid pickup. As you mentioned, a guy who's really, really fast and pretty explosive on film when you watch him. But, I think just obviously adding him to that wide receiver room would be big. But I think just the optics is one of the huge things about this, too, for South Carolina, to go into Pennsylvania and get a guy that Penn State really, really wanted.
Yeah, he's a national recruit. And, I think his ranking will probably do nothing but increase as he goes through his senior year. And then on Monday, actually, while I was recording the pod, Donovan Darden, 6'4", about 225, from Havelock, North Carolina. I just have to thank my good friend and the guardian angel of Havelock, Brad Lawing. That's where he got his start in coaching after graduating from Lenore-Rhine. I love this pickup, Alex. I watched this guy's film He's really long. I think he will probably be a 255-pound guy like Dylan Stewart when all is said and done. But long arms, really explosive, dynamic pass rusher. Hey, I get it. They're called highlights for a reason, right? That nobody's putting their low lights on out there on huddle. But the coaches, they get to watch the whole game film. We don't. We get the highlights. But just what do you like about Donovan Darden, and how much do you like that pickup for South Carolina?
Yeah, I think when you look at picking up Donovan Darden, he kind of fits the mold of what they've been looking for in this, not only this class, but what Clayton White and those guys have been looking for at linebacker. Has an arm length of 34.5 inches and a wingspan of nearly 84 inches. And you mentioned him as a pass rusher type of guy, they obviously being recruited as a linebacker, but, depending on how he fills out either his senior season or once he gets to South Carolina, you maybe could see him slide up into that edge spot and rush the passer, because he can do that. You can see that on film. He can really get after the passer. But, even if he stays at linebacker, he's a guy who, fits just fits right in with what they're doing. And another nice pickup out of North Carolina for them. When you think about who's going after him, I think you think North Carolina State was probably number 2 in that recruitment. So just another solid pickup for Clayton White and company.
No doubt. Wasn't Utah involved with him?
Utah and Kentucky, I think, a little bit too. So
yeah.
You think about Kentucky and linebackers, they know what they're looking for in linebackers.
No doubt about that. So let's look at the true freshman, right? Like, we look at Donovan Darden and think, oh, he's 6'4", 225. Okay, but Wendell Gregory, who was listed like 6'3", 210 pounds or 220 pounds, he came in January. On the roster now, he's listed 6'3", 245. When Fred J.R. Johnson committed the Gamecocks, he was listed as like 6'3", 215. He's now 6'4", 240 pounds. And so I think you bring in as many of these long, lean, quick twitch, explosive guys as you can get, and then you let nature take its course in the weight room, and you see where they fit in on your defense.
Yeah, exactly. Like, you just, committed as a linebacker right now, but I think there's some flexibility with these guys depending on how they, kind of fill out as a senior. Or, as you mentioned, a guy like J.R. Johnson and Wendell Gregory who came in and have really changed their bodies and added on weight. So I think that's kind of the plan, just to see where they fill in, because they got some talented linebackers in that room who will still be here next year. So it's going to be interesting to see how that works out.
No doubt. All right, so Alex, it looks like August 3rd is going to be a huge day for South Carolina, as 2 of their top targets are scheduled to announce on that day. 5-star defensive end Jared Smith out of Alabaster, Alabama, and the crystal balls now seem to be trending away a little bit from South Carolina. And 4-star offensive lineman Jalen Gilchrist. It looks like for Jared Smith, it's going to come down to South Carolina and Auburn. Can the Garnet Trust get it close to the Yellowwood money? I don't know. But I do believe Sterling Lucas has a great relationship with him. As we sit here today, a little over 2 weeks away from these decisions, how are you feeling about Jared Smith, who's 6'7", 240 pounds, and Jalen Gilchrist, who's, I was told measured in at about 6'5", 315 on his official visit. How are you feeling about South Carolina's chances with these guys?
Yeah, I think with Jared Smith, South Carolina's been right there at the top of his recruitment for a long time. And, you always kind of wondered with him coming out of Alabama, like, what was Auburn and Alabama going to do? And now we're seeing Auburn make a big, big push for him. I think Sterling Lucas is going to keep on. I mean, this recruitment's probably going to go down to the wire and to see who's going to end up landing his commitment. And, I think South Carolina will be in it right up to the end. As far as Gilchrist, I think South Carolina's led there for a while, and Maryland looks like they're making a big push here too with him. So I think South Carolina's in a good spot there still, and we'll see come August 3rd.
All right, so at the end of July, there is one open week. Shane Beamer's having a camp and a cookout. South Carolina does not have a running back commitment in this class. I know my guy Jaden Jackson from Franklin, Texas will be visiting. My man Chris Payne, the owner-operator from Nana's Porch, popping in the chat box saying good morning. Good morning to you, my friend. How big do you think that camp workout and then the cookout is going to be with Jaden Jackson, a guy that's rushed for over 4,500 yards and 68 touchdowns the last 2 years? They've won state championships. And look, Franklin, as a 3A program, is basically like a South Point or a Somerville or a Burns. All they do is win, baby. What does your intel say on the odds of South Carolina adding a high school running back prior to the season?
Yeah, we'll have to see how that recruiting board kind of fills out. When you think about who they've gone after, a guy like Jeff Overton, who officially visited, I think, that first weekend, that May 31st weekend, ended up committing to Virginia Tech. It's kind of been he's kind of been trying to figure out what that recruiting board looks like. Now you got to wonder, is Jaden Jackson going to come in and impress enough to land the offer, and we'll see where that goes if that happens. If push come to shove, they may just have to go look for the portal again. But you never know. You still got a senior season with a lot of these guys who can. You guys in senior season pop up have really good senior seasons, and South Carolina can take a look at those guys. But we'll have to keep up to see how that board kind of fills out here.
All right, so we had the big decommitment of Shamari Earls. He was the top-rated player in the class and the only corner in the class. I mean, honestly, I've been very critical of South Carolina for not mining the transfer portal. Neither of the last 2 years has South Carolina added a cornerback via the transfer portal, and they continue to lose their top players, and they're not replacing them with any experience. And obviously that was one of your big question marks. It's one of my big question marks. Does South Carolina have any traction with Onis Cannon Bonnie, the kid from England who was at Raven Gap, and now he's at Heathwood Hall? I know he did show up a couple days there in June and just hang out with Torian Gray. What's the solution for South Carolina at cornerback in this class?
Yeah, I think as far as Conan Benny, it's kind of been a mystery as to how much South Carolina's in, or how much, he's interested in South Carolina, because, he goes to Heathwood Hall, but, it's not, he's coming from England. So, I thought it was interesting that he did come to the 7-on-7 with this team, but then 2 days later did make the trip back over to hang out with Torian Gray and the staff. So, we'll kind of see. I think you think about Tennessee and LSU as some teams right there, maybe North Carolina, who are kind of up there in this recruitment right now too. But yeah, I think corner is another spot that you're going to have to keep up with, as the season goes on, to see what names pop up there.
All right, so, we talked about how big the Lex Cyrus pickup is. Brian Rowe trending to be a really great evaluation and a guy that's already been bumped up to 4-star status. Jaden Sellers coming off an ACL injury right there on the cusp of being a 4-star and didn't even play his junior year. But now it appears South Carolina also has momentum with Malik Clark, 6'2", 185 out of Rock Hill, 10.5 in the 100 meters. Hale McGranahan kind of teased an announcement date's coming soon for him. South Carolina appears to have momentum. How huge and how big of a deal would it be for South Carolina to add Malik Clark? Because you still got this guy named Nicholas Harbor who's 10-1 in the 100 meters. Lex Cyrus 10-4 as a junior in high school in the 100 meters. And Malik Clark at 6'2", 10.5 in the 100 meters as a junior. How big would that be for Mike Furry and for South Carolina football to add Malik Clark as kind of the cherry on top of what I think would be just a dynamic wide receiver class from the high school ranks?
Yeah, if South Carolina can find a way to land Malik Clark, that you kind of just nailed it. I mean, that'd be a huge, huge addition to the class, and really just kind of that as you cherry on top of the wide receiver class if that comes to fruition. Just for it landing an in-state guy, like when you think of Malik Clark and his recruitment, it seems like it's really been a South Carolina North Carolina battle, and you think probably North Carolina early in the recruitment was trending there, and just for South Carolina, if you can land him, keep him in the state would be their number one thing. But you talk about the speed in this recruiting class at wide receiver. Like if that happens, like they got a lot of speed. And one guy, like Jaden Sellers, I mean, he's a guy who's really, really fast, and he's coming off that ACL tear. But we talked to him at the 7-on-7 camp. He's like, I haven't lost my speed. I'm about 80% healthy, but the speed is still there. So you think, pairing these guys with Nick Harbor, South Carolina's wide receiver room. If Malik Clark ends up coming to South Carolina, that there's a lot of speed and would just be a really good class for Mike Furry in his first year.
No doubt about it. All right, so let's wind it down here, and I'm going to ask you about 4 more prospects, and then we're going to let you run. So South Carolina, I think safety is one of the strongest positions on this team, right? Particularly when you factor in the nickel with Jalen Kilgore, who I think may be the most gifted player in South Carolina secondary. David Spalding, if healthy, is a starting caliber nickel or safety guy. You got DQ Smith. And Nick Emanwari. You got Peyton Williams. You got Buddy Mack, who evidently has impressed as a walk-on guy from South Carolina that was playing at Pitt. And then you got Gerald Kilgore, the brother of Jalen Kilgore. Well, South Carolina, they're still looking to add safeties, and so Kendall Daniels Jr. has been on commit watch since the Monday after South Carolina's spring football game. He never committed then after he made the official visit to South Carolina, the final visit weekend. He said, I'm announcing soon. Hell, that was 4 weeks ago. Come Friday. He still hadn't announced. Now we just lost Alex. Hopefully we'll get him back. So while we're waiting on him to hopefully pop back in, I don't know about Kendall Daniels now. Here comes Alex. Let's add Alex to the stage. There he goes.
Sorry, my internet's not cooperating.
Look, it happens. There's just gremlins everywhere.
Yeah.
So Kendall Daniels, it just seems like this guy, he's kind of like the girl that just can't decide if she wants to go out with you or not. But she's still dating everybody, but she's told you she wants to marry you, but she's still going out with 3 or 4 guys. What's your thoughts on is there any end in sight to Kendall Daniels' recruitment?
I think Nate has said, South Carolina's been in really good standing with him for a long time. I think he's mentioned before he just wants to be 1,000% committed or 1,000% sure of his decision. So I think I'm not really sure when the commit is going to come. I think South Carolina's
All right, Alex, you still sound like you're in a tunnel. All right, so how about Lagonza Hayward? His announcement, I think, coincides with South Carolina's cookout. Is that correct? Alex? All right. Alex looks like he's okay. Here he comes again.
You got me now? You can hear me?
Gotcha. Yes.
This internet's just not wanting to work today.
All right. So how about Lagonza Hayward? 6'1", 200, a high 4-star guy. I mean, before he made the visit, it looked like, Tennessee or Florida State was probably going to be the choice. South Carolina blew him away on the visit. I think his announcement, am I correct in saying he is scheduled to announce July 27th, which is a day after South Carolina's cookout? And yep. I believe he's also scheduled to attend that cookout. That seems very fortuitous for the Gamecocks.
Yeah, if he ends up making it to that cookout, I think that's really, really good sign for South Carolina, especially being a day before he commits. You mentioned, South Carolina really kind of blew him away on that official visit and has been in good standing with him for a while. I think with him, Tennessee and Florida, he visited them after South Carolina. I think, seeing some momentum with Tennessee, when you look out there at some other news and you see some Tennessee momentum. But, it seems like South Carolina's in a really good spot there with him. And Torian Gray's done a really good job in that recruitment.
All right, the last 2 guys. South Carolina desperately needs to bolster the defensive front. And so a guy who was committed to South Carolina, went to junior college, has gotten a ton of offers, but visited South Carolina on that June 21st weekend. Xavier Hardy, currently considered the #1 junior college player in the country. And, of course, that also makes him the #1 junior college defensive lineman in the country. Hale last week said this thing could maybe go all the way to signing day. What's your thoughts on Xavier Hardy?
Yeah, I agree with Hale. It seems like this one could kind of not drag out, but, I don't think he's in too much of a rush to make a decision. And, South Carolina, as you mentioned, he was in the class, that 2023 class, and ended up at East Mississippi. I think they've kept a good relationship there with them, and he's still very much high on South Carolina. But, being the #1 JUCO defensive lineman in the country, he's going to have some options elsewhere. I know Alabama, Auburn, teams like that, Mississippi State. He's landed offers from a lot of different schools, but it seems like South Carolina's in a really good spot right now, and that'd be a huge pickup for Travian Robertson.
All right, so speaking of the cookout and the camp, another guy that's scheduled to attend that is Isaiah Hammond, 6'6", 275 from Calvert Hall, Maryland. He does have an offer for South Carolina, but I think they want to eyeball him and work him out in camp, see how he fits in with the players at the cookout. What are the odds Isaiah Hammond ends up in the class?
Yeah, we'll see kind of what transpires there when he's in town to see, how things kind of work out there. Sterling Lucas kind of in that recruitment, so that would just be one to keep an eye on here and see how that goes down.
All right, Alex, I can't thank you enough. I am going to ask you one more question, though. Out of all the guys left, is there potentially another shocker out there like Lex Cyrus? I kind of thought South Carolina had a chance because he visited South Carolina visited Penn State on May 31st. Then that week said, hey, I'm visiting South Carolina on June the 7th, and then I'm making my announcement. But then he didn't make an announcement. And that kind of said, well, maybe Penn State's not such a slam dunk for him. Is there potentially another shocker out there? I know there's some other guys that are announcing coming up. I don't really expect Isaiah Souls to pick South Carolina. I certainly don't believe Cortez Smith or Juan Gaston are picking South Carolina. Bryce Davis seems to be trending towards Clemson, but out of these guys, or maybe somebody out of the blue, could there be another shocker before the season starts?
I'm not really sure if there's a shocker out there. I mean, I guess if South kind of finds a way to land Jared Smith out of Alabaster, Alabama ahead of Auburn, I think that you could probably include that in a shocker if that happens. But, I'm not sure. It seems like they've been for guys that they kind of round out this class, but it seems like they're in a decent spot with. So not sure there's a shocker out there, but I guess we'll have to see.
All right. Well, Alex, I can't thank you enough for jumping on and doing double duty. I would ask you about the Major League Baseball draft, but I'm going to wait on Whittle for that.
Yeah, probably a good choice there.
But great stuff as always. Alex, thank you so much. Be well, my friend. Maybe there'll be a little bit of downtime for you guys after media days, before that cookout and camp and all that. And then is there still going to be a birdies with Beamer? Or are you guys going to get to go with the golf outing? Are they doing that again this year?
Yeah, it's on next Thursday.
So what's your handicap?
Oh, man, I'm going to say no comment on that because probably just keep that to myself.
All right, so watch out for Jordan Kay, all right, because he's almost a scratch golfer, and he did get to play Augusta National this year. He was one of the media boys that won the lottery and got to play Augusta National. So don't be making any side bets with him if you happen to be in his group.
No, maybe he can be in my group and help our team out, or maybe he may not want me in his group. So who knows?
Or maybe he'll make some side bets with the coaches he's playing with and take some of their money.
There you go.
All right. Well, Alex, thanks so much, my friend. Be well. Always enjoy reading your stuff on thebigspur.com. You and Hale are dialed in as it gets on recruiting. And 18 public commitments, which is the most in any summer of Shane. And you still got the 2 unknown welcome homes, but I'm not sure both of them are going to end up at home with Shane Beamer. Maybe they will. Hopefully they will. But there is a real chance South Carolina is going to go into the season with 20-plus high school commitments for the first time of the Beamer era. That would be something else.
Yeah, and that, if that comes to fruition, they can kind of have most of that class done and start looking ahead to future classes.
No doubt about it. Alex, be well. Thanks again. We'll look forward to catching up with you down the road.
I always enjoy being on. Take care.
All right. That was Alex Jones from the Big Spur. So on Monday's pod, I went through my 5 biggest question marks. On tomorrow's pod, I'm going to give you my biggest areas of strength and the knowns about South Carolina's football team. So remember, hit the subscribe button on YouTube, Apple Podcast, Spotify. Give us a 5-star review if you enjoy the show. And so for Alex Jones and the ailing John Whittle, a speedy recovery to you, my friend. This is Keith Alsep saying thanks to everybody who tuned in live at our new time now of 10 a.m. Eastern, 9 Central. This has been Gamecock Pod Live for July the 17th, 2024. And this is Keith Alsep signing off saying, God bless, go Gamecocks. I am out of here.